We'll count up a little bit. Make sure there's a little something to snip for the production. And we'll go live. What's the most important thing we've learned in the last month? That and more this week on the couch. Matthew Freedman, what's the most important thing you've learned in the last month about football?
The most important thing I've learned. Everyone's going to pay attention to the quarterback battles and the rookies in particular. Out of the quarterback battles, the one that intrigues me the most is maybe Drew Lock. And what I've learned is that maybe he's not horrible. Like maybe he could actually progress. It's his second year with his offensive coordinator. He has the weapons around him. Like he has maybe outside of Tampa Bay's wide receiver room, maybe the best quartet of wide receivers in the league. Like Tim Patrick is your number 4 wide receiver. That's pretty good. He's got good receiving backs. He's got 2 really explosive playmaking tight ends. If Drew Lock is somehow better than everyone expects, he could end up annihilating his ADP. And it's not just that. Like Drew Lock is the biggest question mark on the Broncos roster. If Drew Lock is maybe just average, we're talking about a team that it feels like it could make the playoffs pretty easily, but with their defense, like maybe they could challenge some of the teams that people are just expecting will roll over the rest of the AFC. So Drew Lock, to me, the fact that he's not horrible and maybe good, maybe the week 1 starter for the Broncos, that is what I'm taking out of the preseason so far.
Yeah, that's a good one because it makes different parts of the offense warm and cold, the pass offense.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, it's a deep pass offense. I'm just revisiting when you bring this up that after the draft, right, they take Judy, they take Hamler, they take Okwegnom, and they already had Cortland Sutton, and they had Noah Fant. And there were these visions of, wow, they're going to be able to track meet defenses right out of the stadium, but it's all hinging on Drew Lock. And I think what you outlined is that there's a wide range of outcomes for Lock. There's a wide range of outcomes for this offense. There's a wide range of outcomes for this team. They won a Super Bowl with the corpse of Peyton Manning, and they have Vic Fangio, and they have the pinchers with Chubb and Miller, and they also revamped their secondary. Remember, they now have Kyle Fuller. They have Patrick Surtain. They brought back Kareem Jackson. They have Justin Simmons, who's very good. So, yeah, this could be fun. First week, the Giants. You know how you like, if you're in those leagues where you draft a team defense just to play them week 1 and see what happens, make that the Broncos.
Yeah.
Against Daniel Jones. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. By the way, here with Matthew Freedman, now at FTN. And but either way, we always dip our toes right back into the same river. We'll talk rivers later. Rivers, fire hoses. The idea being that there's this constant flow, right? You can never step in the same river twice. The universe of fantasy football information is never the same twice now because of what we're learning in the preseason, because of what we're learning from camp and just general tones. Let's knock out some of the biggest ones, though, Matthew. Michael Thomas, are you more inclined to tell people take the plunge and hold on to him and see what you get, or are you more inclined to say let somebody else take that ride?
I mean, this is a non-answer, but I think he's now priced probably appropriately. So I would say wherever you were before, that's probably where you are now. If you were a Michael Thomas bull before, I think you're still one. And if you were fading him before, I think you're still fading him now, and you just have a little more ammunition for why you were fading him. But if you look at the drafts where he's going, like wide receiver 40, according to FFPC data, I think that's about fair. Like that feels right because we all know the upside that he has. If he comes back and he's healthy, he could be a league winner in the second half of the season. You're just going to have him on your bench for, it feels like at least the first month, maybe longer. And it could be even more than that. Maybe he never comes back totally healthy. So, this is a non-answer, but my non-answer is whatever you thought before, that's probably what you should continue to think.
That's fair. And I think that he fits in different team builds well. Like if you go don't break the seal on wide receiver until the 6th round. Then he makes a lot of sense. 0 wide receiver, I guess you would call it. He makes sense. I could even make a case from actually, if you start wide receiver, and you don't take another wide receiver until the 7th or 8th round and have him as your wide receiver 3, hopefully, coming in and giving you that kick on that last leg of the relay race, knowing that if you have him as your wide receiver 3 when he's clicking, and with Taysom Hill. So I guess everybody would agree that for the Saints passing game, Winston is better than Hill. Okay, fair.
Yeah.
With Hill, last year, when he probably wasn't 100%, he had 9 for 104, 9 for 105, and 8 for 84 in 3 out of the 4 games. Mm-hmm. Like that's 3 out of the 4 Taysom Hill starts. That's fine.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great. So I am with you. I actually took Michael Thomas for the first time this summer in a draft today, because I'm coming around on the idea that it's about upside, right? You can't deny the upside. It's just a question of clogging up a roster spot that could be used on a waiver wire pickup, but you can, again, draft and manage your roster around that. It's similar to Deshaun Watson, who we won't talk about because how many times can we say we don't know what's going to happen?
Right.
It could, So moving on, you mentioned quarterback battles. You mentioned Drew Lock, and I think you're right to project Drew Lock as the leader right now. Are you feeling any lean anywhere else? San Francisco, Chicago, New England, these quarterback battles where obviously, again, it's a different offense. It's a different picture depending on who wins.
I think that Justin Fields should be the week 1 starter, but I think it will probably be Andy Dalton, because if you're the coaching staff, you don't want to have a situation where in week 1 going against the Rams, right? I believe going against the Rams, you have a tough defense. Justin Fields looks horrible, and then you feel like you have to bench him. I think it's easier if they start with Dalton and then go to Fields a little bit later. So I'm imagining, I don't think I'd do that. I think I would go with Fields week 1 and then just see what happens. But I imagine that they continue down this path of thinking Andy Dalton is our starter. In San Francisco, I think it's a little bit looser, and I think Lance does have a chance to win the week 1 job. Even if he doesn't, I think there's a pretty good chance that by week 6, he's the guy that's in there, because he has a playmaking capability that Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't have. I think, Garoppolo right now is the, quote unquote, better quarterback, just in terms of what he can do in that offense, the professionalism, the experience that he has. Like, I think he can, manage that offense better than Lance can. But when Lance is ready, Lance will be able to make plays that Jimmy Garoppolo won't. So I'm still thinking, even if neither one of those rookie quarterbacks ends up starting the season, they are still guys that I want to have exposure to in fantasy, because whenever they start, and I think it's sooner rather than later, both of them, because of their rushing ability and just overall playmaking ability, I think both of them do have the ability to be, the sort of Konami code league winners who really explode in the second half of the season.
It's easy to get carried away when you think about Trey Lance and the San Francisco 49ers. Not so much Justin Fields, not as much Justin Fields.
Right.
Because, what's the news this morning? Tevin Jenkins, back surgery. That wasn't the plan. That wasn't the plan whenever they let Charles Leno go. Yeah. It's not saying it's a disaster, but it's not ideal. They have a good interior offensive line, especially for the running game. They're not going to hang Justin Fields out to dry. And then there's still the question of, is Matt Nagy a good offensive coach? Does he add value to the offense? I don't know. Early with Trubisky, it looked like maybe he did. Yeah. Now, is Trubisky the problem, or are we going to learn more that it wasn't just Trubisky? I don't know. But with San Francisco and Trey Lance, it's easy to get carried away. It's easy for your heart to start thumping and thinking, we don't even know how good this could be. Again, Robert Griffin III, I always go back to that, Kyle Shanahan. But what's something else other than that San Francisco offense that gets your heart thumping, or maybe makes you feel like you want to get carried away, that this could be a nice wave to surf all the way to fantasy championships, DFS wins, lots of money?
I don't know if I would say really gets the heart beating or makes me think of fantasy championships. But out of the rookies, the guy who really caught my eye was Rondale Moore. And
Mm,
I'll just say some of this is because I've just been obsessed with Rondale Moore for years, all the way from his freshman season at Purdue when he was just dominant player with the ball in his hands. And you saw right away, now granted, different quarterback,
mhm,
the top wide receivers in the offense weren't playing, but right away you saw Rondale Moore being fed the ball in week
mhm,
1 of the preseason. And I think they were using him in the ideal way that you would want Rondale Moore to be used. Get the ball in his hands very quickly on screen passes, near the line of scrimmage, and let him kind of make his way through. And those aren't sexy targets, but they're going in PPR leagues, they're going
mhm,
to convert into points very easily. And so that can make him a really high floor player who ends up having an elevated ceiling as well because of his ability to make plays. So I think he has a pretty good chance of being a week 1 starter who is featured in the offense. And I mean, AJ Green, there's injury history there. He wasn't very efficient last year. I think there's a pretty good chance that Rondale Moore ends up being the number 2 pass catcher in a high volume passing offense. And that makes him really intriguing at his ADP. So Rondale Moore out of the receivers, particularly the rookies, and then both of the Harris running backs, Najee Harris, the featured workload that he's going to have, I don't care if the Steelers' offensive line is not that good. If a guy is going to get 300 touches, that is something that makes him valuable at the running back position. So I'm interested in Najee Harris, and I'm also interested in Damien Harris. Obviously much further down the board. He's not the pass catcher that a lot of people want out of their featured running backs, but I think he is going to be pretty locked in as the lead back. At least that's kind of what we saw in week 1 of the preseason. He's intriguing to me, especially in a scenario where Mac Jones might win the starting job, even if it doesn't happen right away. But if Mac Jones ends up being the starter, that means Cam Newton isn't going to be the guy unless, God forbid, they go with a 2 quarterback system. Cam Newton isn't going to be the guy who's getting a lot of the carries within the 5-yard line like he did last year. Those
mhm.
carries would be going to a running back, and I would imagine it would be Damien Harris. So he's really intriguing to me because we did see him in week 1 really have that locked in lead back job. And if goal line carries accompany it, then he could end up massively outperforming his ADP. So Rondale Moore at wide receiver, and then Najee Harris and Damian Harris at running back. Those are the guys that really caught my eye in week 1.
Moore makes sense. Well, one of the things about Moore, that first preseason game, and preseason's always more important for rookies. It's that first glimpse.
Yeah.
We can always look back when a player is special and say you could see it from the moment he started to play. It's important that way. Not everything that happens in the preseason is important, but rookie performances are worth paying attention to. And if we go back to when Cliff Kingsbury was hired and then they ended up taking Kyler Murray, we thought, well, he's just going to institute a college offense, or at least something as close to the pure version of what he had in mind for Kyler Murray when he lusted after Kyler Murray when he was a college coach. And because those offenses were so prolific at producing numbers, what we care about, that was exciting. And it hasn't really come to fruition. And there's a whole storyline here of Kyler Murray, first full offseason that he can concentrate on football. He only really started concentrating on football 2 years ago. And you have him hopefully taking to this coaching, hopefully realizing more of the vision, Rodney Hudson firming up the offensive line. Let's see what happens. And if they're running something like a college offense, like you said, Rondale Moore gets Debo Samuel, right? Those running plays that count as a PPR point plus whatever they do. It makes a lot of sense. And maybe you could add that dimension to the offense. Damien Harris, and it's easy. Like you get excited about Damien Harris. What I'm picturing in a larger way is that if you get competent quarterback play, they have an offensive line. We know the defense is going to be good. Now they have some talent, although the tight ends are getting banged up already. They have some talent, wide receiver and tight end. If this turns back into a winning team, a team that puts that Belichick boa constrictor hold on the game script and just dictates how the game is going to go. And I'm always looking at the early schedule. You know what's an interesting game to circle is that New England Miami week 1 game. Tua, right? The young quarterback. And then, speaking of young quarterbacks, they're going to get the Jets. They're going to get Zach Wilson in week 2, draft the New England defense, maybe. New Orleans, whoever wins that quarterback battle. And then, of course, it all leads up to the New England Tampa Bay game, week 4. That's going to be like the Super Bowl during the season. That's going to be an awesome game. So if Damien Harris is the point of the spear, scoring those touchdowns and killing those games in the second half, as this offensive line, which is very good, is putting the lean on the opponent, yeah, he could be easily a 4th or 3rd round pick value instantly. Like, we're just going to watch those games. He's going to score a touchdown in each of those games. He's going to have 80 plus yards on the ground, and they're just going to use him as the guy to finish the game, even though Sony Michel's looking pretty good. So I think those are both excellent calls. And just thinking about not just how a player is playing and how they're being used, but whether those things align and can amplify each other, I think is where the real special gear is. Now, everybody has heard me talk about Kyle Pitts. Okay. I'm not going to repeat myself. What do you think about Kyle Pitts this year?
I mean, I don't want to get too carried away, but we talked about Saquon Barkley, a few years ago as like generational talent. And, as someone who actually warranted that description, that's the way I feel about Kyle Pitts. We, in NFL history, have never had a guy who has his combination of draft capital, college production, and athleticism. We've had Vernon Davis, who came pretty close with the draft capital and athleticism, but he didn't have Kyle Pitts' production. No one has ever hit all 3 of those factors the way that Kyle Pitts has. So I was already pretty ecstatic about him entering the season. And then you have the Julio Jones trade, which just means that a massive onslaught of targets could be coming his way. So I know that rookie tight ends we should be pessimistic about. I just, historically, I know that. And yet I still cannot help myself because I do think of him a little bit more as a wide receiver, as an all-around pass catcher. And in fact, he, I believe, is the first tight end in college history who was a finalist for the Biletnikoff Award, right? And that is an award that just goes to the best pass catcher in college football. It has always been wide receivers nominated for this award until last year when Kyle Pitts was a finalist. And I think that fact really brings home the point that he is a tight end bodied player with a wide receiver's skill set. And that doesn't mean he can't do some of the general tight end things that you need your tight end to do, and just in terms of lining up in line and blocking, chipping, doing all of that. But as a pass catcher, I do think he has that wide receiver type of ability in year 1 to be a difference maker. So I understand the enthusiasm around him. And I do think that the top 3, the big 3 that we have of Kelsey, Waller, and Kittle, I think those guys should be going at the top of the draft at the tight end position. But Kyle Pitts at number 4 as the guy who goes right after them, I am totally fine with. If you wanted to have Hawkinson there, fine. Whoever. I can see, a case for 2 or 3 other guys going number 4. But Kyle Pitts has undeniable upside, and I think he has a lot of volume coming his way because Julio Jones is no longer there. Yeah. And by the way, I'll just add one more thing as I'm filibustering about how great Kyle Pitts is.
Please do.
I mean, we know that Arthur Smith, as the head coach here, his play calling tendencies, he does utilize a lot of 2 tight end sets. So I don't think it's Hayden Hurst is going to be this thorn in the side of Kyle Pitts. Hayden Hurst probably will see a decent amount of action, but it's all going to come in the service of this 2 tight end system that Arthur Smith likes to run, and that I think will create the multiple avenues for us to see lots of interesting things with Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts in line, Kyle Pitts in the slot, Kyle Pitts lined up out wide. I think we're going to see him used all over that offense with a head coach who, as a play caller, has a history of doing some pretty intriguing things with his tight ends. So all around, I am excited about Kyle Pitts.
Thank you.
Of course, I have to add one thing.
Oh,
In every draft, there is always someone more excited about
me.
Kyle Pitts
That's
than me.
me.
Yes.
That's me.
So I'm excited about him, but I haven't gotten a lot of him because the market is also very excited about Kyle Pitts. And I understand it. I think it's
Yeah.
warranted. But there's
Yeah.
always someone who is a bigger Kyle Pitts optimist than I am.
So I'm overjoyed. I feel like I need to smoke a cigarette now, to be honest. I'm overjoyed because, and I don't smoke cigarettes, because I've thought of you, Matthew, as a very analytical analyst, a very objective analyst. Um, and to hear you basically echo the same points that I've been making from my more emotional, narrative-driven, narrative street world makes me feel a lot of joy, because I think what you have outlined, basically alignment on the front side entering into this, then we learn what his NFL destiny and situation is. More alignment, everything aligning for production, everything aligning for. And I also love the way you pointed out the Biletnikoff thing, because what I like to point out is Lance Zierlein, who is my favorite draft analyst. He writes stuff to NFL.com draft profiles. They're all excellent. And he said in the Kyle Pitts profile, I know people are tired of hearing me say this, but I would just want to echo this back to you. He said teams in Kyle Pitts' NFL division might have to rethink their roster in light of having to play him twice a year. Like, and Lance Zierlein is not given over to getting carried away. And when you point out the Biletnikoff thing, similarly, like they don't nominate tight ends. It doesn't mean, it's not because tight ends aren't eligible. I always just thought it was a wide receiver award. I love that you pointed this out. I thought it was the best college wide receiver. And it's not. It's the best pass catcher, and that's how he gets nominated for that. What's this all point to? Glitch in the matrix, right? Kyle Pitts is like, these little things are trying to alert us. This is different. Something different is going to happen here. And maybe it doesn't come to fruition, but this is how the story starts if this is truly going to be a unicorn. As someone told me a couple of months ago when I was getting, and I never set out to be this Kyle Pitts flag bearer, but it was the instant negative take on him. And like you said, these overwhelming, in your face, like on a big billboard. I'm thinking about highways after we talked about, what we'll talk about, saying like 1 mile down the road, like something very different, right? Wall Drug or one of those places, one of those big roadside attractions. So it excites me. But like I said, I see you as an analytical analyst. So I just want to ask you, go all the way back. We're kind of mixing off the rails anyway. Who's like an inspiration for you as an analyst, or who you feel like was influential, or what was influential in how you came about your methodology for attacking this thing that we do?
That's a fantasy douche, you know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be Frank Dupont. I mean, even in terms of like my origin story of getting into the industry, I was obsessed with just doing whatever research I could on Dynasty in particular. And Fantasy Douche back in the day had his blog, Fantasy Douche, and he was just this random guy who is really going in the weeds on
Mm-hmm.
random prospects. And I thought it was fantastic. And so totally loved the work that he did. And then he started RotoViz, and Sean Siegel joined,
Mm-hmm.
and he had his Money in the Banana Stand blog. And John Moore joined, and he had his college football experiment. And I was reading separately all three of these guys' blogs. And then they all were there at RotoViz, and I was thinking, this is amazing. This is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have to be a part of this somehow. But I always thought of Frank as being the guy whose analytical style always made the most sense in terms of the way that my brain works.
Mm-hmm.
So he was always the guy for me. So it has to be Fantasy Douche, aka Frank Dupont, who obviously no longer in the industry, sort of retired because he had bigger and better things to do. But and he leaves the fantasy analysis now to us peons. But Fantasy Douche is for me always the gold standard.
It's good. It's definitely a paradigm shifter, and really in anything we set out to do, it is good. to do that. And one way you can do that is actually get in the Football Guys Players Championship, because you can win $500,000. That will change some paradigms in your life. 3.7 million total prizes. Online drafts are underway. I also want to let you all know that, of course, during Labor Day, there's the Draftathon, and FFPC Football Guys donate $50 from each draft to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So it's time to put all of these beliefs into action. Put your money where your mouth is. Football Guys Players Championship. Bring home $500,000. Speaking of all of these places, all of these outlets in fantasy, I know you have a new home and some new things going on. Matthew, you're at FTN now. What's it like there?
I love it. And Action was great. I still love the people at Action. But, it was kind of time. And I wanted, more of a leadership role. And I have that at FTN as the chief strategy officer. And it's great. I'm very excited about what we have going on with the company. And, the company started really launched last July. And I feel as if so much has been accomplished in 1 year and 1.5 months. And so knowing the foundation that is in place, I think it's the perfect opportunity to be able to build on top of that. So, we're entering our second NFL season. And so I'm excited to see everything that we can do, the improvements that we can make upon what we did last year. So it's fantastic. I absolutely love it. I like thinking of things in big picture structural ways, and I have the opportunity to do that every day. So totally thrilled with that. And then I'm also the advisor for a new DFS platform called Top Prop, which I think is a really cool thing, where your typical ESPN and Yahoo leagues, you can sync that up with Top Prop and then play with your regular season long managed roster. You can play each week a head-to-head DFS type of contest. And so I think that's pretty cool, as a supplement to the general action that you would have in your regular season long leagues.
Yeah, there's so much that maps to stuff that people have always done, Matthew, like the classic baseball game, throwing a dollar on every pitch and things like that. That it's a whole new frontier out there, imagining what's going to come, and in some way shaping what's going to come with the way that technology and content interlock with what people want to do or have already been doing, or maybe something they would want to do if they had heard about it or looked at it that way. And it's in some ways, this fantasy football thing seems like it must have peaked. How could it have ever even gotten this big in the first place? But because it's merging into this whole other world of, let's just call it sports speculation with stakes,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is exciting times indeed. So I guess, again, why we are gathered here today is to share with all the great people, very gracious people, giving us their time and their attention, some of the things that at the very least we're paying attention to. So here's another way I'll serve it up to you, Matthew. Okay. Confirmation bias is fine. Don't reject information because it's confirmation bias. You might just be right. Okay. But the most valuable things I find in the preseason are whenever I don't want to change my priors. I want to stick with it. And I see something that makes me say, I have to change. I have to get off of this player. Or I have to accept that this isn't going to happen. What's something that it's not necessarily going down smoothly, but you're swallowing and digesting right now?
Yeah. Myles Gaskin.
Yeah.
Very, very unfortunate, because he was fantastic last year, very efficient, and he was a great player in college. I think he does have a 3-down skill set. He's not a big guy, and so that's something that I think could work against him on early downs. But he certainly has the receiving capability. And given that the Dolphins didn't draft a running back, given that they brought in only Malcolm Brown, I was pretty optimistic about the idea of Gaskin not being, a locked-in workhorse, but being a guy who would be the clear leader of his backfield and have a chance to score touchdowns, have a chance to get a lot of targets coming his way. And based on what we saw in week 1 of the preseason with Malcolm Brown being the starter, with Ahmed working in, I'm a little more. It's more than a little more. I'm
Yeah.
pessimistic now. I'm outright pessimistic about the idea of Gaskin really being able to hold down that backfield. I still think he is the best back within that trio. And ultimately, I would expect him to have the most fantasy points at the end of the season out of that trio. But I do not think that he, at this point, has running back one upside, barring some sort of injury within that trio. And, injuries happen. Running back is a fragile position, but he no longer has the clear path to upside that I thought he had a couple of weeks ago. So that part is disappointing. It's a very tough pill to swallow.
Yeah. And I think there's a meta tough pill to swallow from that too, where there's a style of analysis that is eventually players will adhere to their pedigree, even if for a time they don't, right? So players that fall late into the third day of the draft or go undrafted and there are ways you can, by the way, separate these. So where I tend to not truck with this kind of analysis, Matthew, is like throwing all undrafted free agents in one bucket, because not everyone goes undrafted for the same reason. It's not as difficult to believe, say, Preston Williams is going to be good because he went undrafted because of character issues, not because he can't play. So we can at least make those kind of distinctions and at least put these into buckets that are more apples, oranges. But the idea that Myles Gaskin was coming into the league kind of thought of as a end of the roster role player, and for a year he wasn't used that way, partially because he seized opportunity, but partially by default. But then you enter this offseason, and this has been a strange offseason for Miami and running back. They were going to be in on Aaron Jones, but then Aaron Jones signed with Green Bay before free agency opened. So were they really going to be? I don't know. I have never heard anything definitive whether they were in or out on him. But then this thing comes out that they had a very small budget for running back. I don't know if that's after Aaron Jones wasn't available, and they signed Malcolm Brown for like 1.7 million. Okay, he's just going to be a role player. That's a role player salary. It's a backup salary. That's a solid backup salary. They were going to draft Javonte Williams. Then Denver jumps in front of them for Javonte Williams. So does this team really believe running back doesn't matter, so to speak? Or does it just happen that every time they're about to do something about the running back situation, something else intervenes? Or do maybe they like Myles Gaskin? And I think we're finding that no, they're just going to go with this approach. And obviously, they're not convinced that running back's important because they haven't done anything frantic at the position. But you back off of that, and some of it does go back to that idea. James Robinson's another one. It gives me heartburn to think about this because he looked like a good football player. If you didn't know he was undrafted and you watched him last year, you'd say, that's a good running back. Yeah. And that's just also a good football player because there's zero loss of intensity while everyone else around him is not everyone else. But Jacksonville, the last couple of years, has had this tendency to just start to sleepwalk and trudge through the second half of the season. And that was not James Robinson last year. So you just hope that Urban Meyer can see what James Robinson really is. And doesn't James Robinson align well with the way Urban Meyer wants to win football games anyway? Better than Travis Etienne. We'll see. So the pedigree thing, and then there's Tua. Tua's kind of aligned with Drew Lock, the way you let off the show, Matthew. This quarterback, like, could he be better than we think? Have we not really seen him blossom? And then what does that mean for this whole offense? It's a jumbled offense like Denver's pass offense. And we'll see lots of storylines there. Again, week 1, New England. Here we go. I mean, it's all on you. And as I've mentioned a few times, it's almost not fair for Tua to have this fork in the road in his career entering year 2. Usually quarterbacks, first-round quarterbacks, top 10, top 5 quarterbacks get to year 3 or year 4 before we say, okay, Daniel Jones is now or never. With Tua to year 2. So what about the confirmation bias? Give me something that you're not just pushing aside as confirmation bias, even though it agrees with what you thought going into the preseason.
Something that agrees with what I thought going into the preseason. So I don't know how much this works for the question, but Raheem Mostert not playing in week 1. I think this is a pretty good sign. And maybe some of that is just, he's a veteran. You don't need to play him in week 1, whatever it is. But my sense of this is that Raheem Mostert, we know he has tremendous upside when he's healthy. We've seen it in his past 16 games. going all the way back to 2019, the run he had in the playoffs, his, I believe, 8 healthy games last year. You put all that together, and this is a guy with, like 1,200 yards rushing and, however many yards receiving. Like this is a guy who has significant upside. And people have been so enthusiastic about Trey Sermon that I believe Raheem Mostert and the possibility he has within this offense has been undervalued. I do think that Mostert is probably the starter, and maybe it's a situation of Trey Sermon playing the kind of Tevin Coleman role, and Raheem Mostert continues to play the Raheem Mostert role, which he's done a pretty good job of doing whenever he's been healthy. And at his ADP, I think he's a guy worth investing in. And the fact that he didn't play at all in week 1, maybe that means that they just want to see a little bit more of the rookie Trey Sermon.
Yeah.
But I also can read that and say, maybe they just know they don't want to risk Raheem Mostert. They know he's a featured part of the offense. He doesn't need the preseason work. To me, that's a sign that I think is encouraging. So I'm still pretty interested in Raheem Mostert as a guy that you can get as your running back 3, running back 4, who has the potential upside if he stays healthy. That's the big key for him. If he stays healthy for the entire season, I think he massively outperforms his ADP going in round 7 right now in FFPC.
I have no problem with Raheem Mostert, the player, or Raheem Mostert, the player, in alignment with the situation. And I think this could be one of those cases. This is on the couch, right? So we're going to talk about psychoanalyzing ourselves. But it's how much Raheem Mostert have you had in the past? How much have you relied on him in DFS or on your fantasy teams? Because the reality is that Raheem Mostert is a dream Shanahan back when his combination of the kind of athleticism he has, the urgency he runs with, and his acceleration and takeoff. It's gorgeous. By the way, maybe just keep your mind open to not Michael Carter, but Ty Johnson doing something similar with the Jets. It's time to open your mind to this. This might be something that people, a lot of people are talking about the Myles Gaskin thing, or it's out there. The Ty Johnson thing, I don't know if people are aware of that. I think he's going to get first shot at this running game, not Michael Carter. And he has that long speed to make it worth sticking with him because of what can happen whenever and they have actually assembled a pretty good offensive line there, at least on the tackles and Elijah Vera Tucker. Anyway, back to Mostert. It's a question of whether you've relied on Mostert, because there's no doubt he can take any touch of the house, 80-yard touchdowns, no big deal. But going back to whenever he, a few years back, got an opportunity during the season, I think he had like a forearm fracture or something. It wasn't even a soft tissue injury or a leg injury, but he was about to take off and then injury. And then, of course, you had that thing behind the scenes where he had to do basically a holdout just to get the 49ers to give him a little respect. Like, just don't pay me like the last guy on the roster. Pay me like the backup, And he was successful. His ADP jumped around as that was going on last year. And you saw early in the season, if you took Mostert and you were relying on him, you were happy. And then he got hurt. And then once the injury seal's broken, now you have this trepidation. What's his workload going to be? Is he going to last the game? And because he's not a passing down back, because he's not the goal line back, that creates a lot wider range of outcomes for him in any given week. 80-yard touchdown or, 9 carries for 40 yards. These are some of the polls with him. Meanwhile, and the other thing that Mostert represents, again, is like, I like investing in the San Fran running game. Yes. That soil, fertile soil that good things grow out of. To that point, and I got to pull this up because, again, I'm always like one thought away from something Eric Stoner and I have chatted about. And he talked about Jeff Wilson and his ratio of huge games to starts, and why I like Mostert. And Mostert could be, in fantasy football terms, an upside running back too. And certainly in DFS terms, where we're looking at just a week-to-week basis, Mostert is someone that you have to be aware of, especially week 1 against Detroit, right? Oh, yeah. Yes. But what I'm drawn to when I look at the San Francisco season last season, and this is without the quarterback play that they're going to get from Trey Lance, okay, and how that's going to stress defenses, especially in a way that will free up the running game. When they have to play 11-on-11 football, this already very good running game, and they got Alex Mack this offseason, it's going to be even better. But what happened when Raheem Mostert was out last year? Okay. Jeff Wilson, he scored 2 touchdowns. Jeff Wilson, he scored 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Jeff Wilson, he only scored 1 touchdown, but he had 183 yards. Jeff Wilson, he scored 2 touchdowns. That's 4 out of the 5 games that Mostert missed. Or, Mostert missed more than that, but Wilson also missed some of those games. It's 4 out of the 5 games that Mostert missed, and Wilson was healthy. 4 out of those 5 games were like elite fantasy football games.
Yeah.
But Mostert isn't going to give us that. Trey Sermon might. So that's where I'm interested, but I think we're both drawn to that San Francisco running game, and I love that you want to put respect on Mostert's name because he's a good player. He's in a good situation. He's what we want in fantasy football. It's just if you've owned him, I shouldn't use that word. If you've used him in fantasy leagues or used him in your DFS lineups, then you know the disappointment.
I have two thoughts coming off of what you said. I should say maybe I'm a little more optimistic in that I haven't been bitten by Mostert the way that other people have been. The second thing is that I would counter just a little bit by saying at this point, Mostert doesn't have to deal with Jeffrey Wilson. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's also a little more upside for him in that there could be a few more carries per game coming his way. There's not that third guy in the backfield the way that there was previously. But I do get your point.
Yeah.
The upside that we saw from Wilson last year, very possible that upside is now contained in Trey Sermon.
And I think that the signifier here, much like Trey Lance, and it wasn't to the extent they didn't mortgage the future to trade up for Trey Lance, but in some ways it makes it more meaningful that after they traded up for Trey Lance, they still traded up for Trey Sermon, which signifies to me a similar idea of like Kyle Shanahan said, not Garoppolo past this year. And I think it's not Mostert past this year. You know, we're looking to the future, but the future can come earlier than we think. Either way, I always come back to this with the San Francisco offense. Just I'm excited. I'm really excited. Kind of like Kyle Pitts in this sense that we may see something we haven't seen before. We haven't seen. Remember what Kyle Shanahan did with the Atlanta offense?
Yeah.
You know, was that like super special personnel? Yeah. It was okay. It wasn't an all-star assemblage of talent that we would look back and say, well, anybody could have made in that offense. So when you give him what he's going to have to work with, and you see it in the excitement from the veterans when they talk about Trey Lance, they know it doesn't it just indicate to you how much they know Garoppolo's been holding the team back, or the team could be even better with a better quarterback. LA is another interesting team on that. On that note, Matthew, give me something that is something a player said, or it can be something a coach said, just something someone said. Because I think that there's also all these different sound bites, all these different quotes, and most of them we can feel free to ignore, but not all of them. What's one you haven't felt free to ignore?
Well, we've had for a couple of years the Antonio Gibson, falling into Christian McCaffrey type of usage. After he was drafted, the coaching staff said that they saw similarities to Christian McCaffrey. And then I believe it was Kyle Allen, one of the backup quarterbacks for Washington, recently said, Christian McCaffrey type of usage. And, given that he was coming from Carolina before, maybe he has a little bit more of a perspective on that than your typical NFL player. That said, Christian McCaffrey is a rare type of player. I'm very optimistic on Antonio Gibson in general. I think he has a ton of talent, but the usage that we saw for him in week 1 of the preseason didn't really align with the Christian McCaffrey, rhetoric that is surrounding Antonio Gibson. And so I'm very torn on this between, just sort of hearing the rhetoric and knowing that that's what I want to hear. I want to hear talk about, Christian McCaffrey and that type of workload for Antonio Gibson. And I know that I want Antonio Gibson to succeed in general. Entering the NFL, he's the type of player I tend to like. Big-bodied running back who can catch the ball like that. That's the type of guy that I want, especially a guy as athletic as he is. So I know I'm inclined to want him to have success, and he's entering his second year, which is like, this is it. Like, this is the get up and go get it type of year for a running back like this. So I know my inclination is to want to believe that the Christian McCaffrey usage is coming. But what we saw in week one just doesn't align with what has been said. And so I'm a little bit conflicted about it. I'm still probably going to be pretty optimistic and on board with Antonio Gibson, but I'm preparing also to be disappointed.
So let's rewind a year. Okay. What happened in the Washington backfield at this time last year? Adrian Peterson got released. And you remember he said, well,
Yes.
they want to feed one guy, and they I guess they think Antonio Gibson could be that guy, right? It was one of the best pieces of fantasy intel we've ever gotten, really ever.
Yeah.
Was from Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson confirmed something that we can only speculate about usually. We can only guess and hope we're right.
Yeah.
And he said that. Now, what happened in week one? He got 9 carries, caught 2 balls, 44 total yards, and Peyton Barber scored 2 touchdowns. That doesn't look like they're trying to make him the guy. Peyton Barber carried the ball 17 times in that game. So that was troubling. But what happened as the year went on? Sure enough, we saw, yes, they want him to be that guy. And again, I'm going down narrative street here, but what did you want to hear going into year 2? Because the knock on him was he barely played running back in college. Well, all the things we're hearing this offseason are the game's slowing down for him. He's more patient. He understands the plays more. His athleticism is popping, and constantly hearing they want to use him more in the passing game. What does this all really equal? They're going to give him the opportunity that he earns, whatever that is. Whatever they march out there, Gibson has the opportunity to change it to whatever he's capable of, whatever he shows that is in the best interest of the team. So whether it happens in week 1 or not, I think we can believe that they're willing to make Gibson that foundational to offense if he's good enough to merit it. And that's what you want in a fantasy league, right? I mean, that's, again, one of the things I like to say right now, Matthew, is 2-3 weeks into the season, the new conventional wisdom is going to land on us with like 1,000-pound weight. We're just going to say, oh, Joe Mixon's a top 5 back, or Antonio Gibson's a top 5 back, or DK Metcalf is actually the number 1 fantasy wide receiver. All of these things that if you said it right now, people would look at you, give you the side eye, and say, you're just trying to get clicks. That's just clickbait. Are going to end up being true. And you have to try to figure out your best stab at those instead of just thinking that what everyone's predicting is what's going to happen. Because I can tell you one thing for sure, that ain't it. Like the consensus average of what everyone's predicting isn't going to be accurate on a situation-to-situation basis. And where you play it as if that's what's going to happen isn't going to move the needle on the outcome of your DFS lineups or the outcome of your fantasy season. It's where you disagree that is most important. So I guess we're about to go off the rails here. Anything on that note where you feel like you're in disagreement with like 90% of us right now?
Ooh, that's a great question. Off the top of my head, I cannot think of anything where I feel that I'm really out of the consensus with everyone. Actually, this is, I don't know if I would say this is out of the consensus, but I do have 2 quarterback takes. One, I think it's going to be Taysom Hill and not Jameis Winston. And like if you look at different sports books and they'll post odds who's going to be the week 1 starter. Jameis Winston is still favored to be the week 1 starter. I think it's going to be Taysom Hill. And I think he has tremendous upside as the starter. We saw it last year in the 4-game stint where he was the starter. It's not because he's a fantastic passer, but he has this Konami code rushing capability, and maybe he's a better passer than we think, right? Maybe he improves this year as a passer. So Taysom Hill, I want to be pretty invested in him. And if it doesn't work out, then I drop him. and move on, just like you tend to do at the quarterback position if you go late quarterback anyway. But Taysom Hill, I'm pretty interested in what he could do this year. And then another quarterback who really stands out to me, and I don't know how I feel about it, Sam Darnold. And it has nothing to do with Darnold on his own, because we just kind of have to bite the bullet and admit that what we've seen out of him so far in his career has not been good. Minus maybe like a 4-game stretch at the end of his rookie season or something like that. But in general, what we've seen out of him to this point has not been encouraging. But you have a situation with Christian McCaffrey as one of the best pass catching backs in the league, and then DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson going in the top 36 at the position, and Terrace Marshall going pretty quickly after that. It's almost inconceivable for a quarterback to be able to support all of those ADPs without himself at least being a decent player. So his ADP is totally, it's incommensurate with what we see out of the pass catchers on that team. And so it makes me think either we're really high, too high on some of the pass catchers, if not all of the pass catchers for the Panthers, or we are really low on Sam Darnold. And so I wouldn't say I'm going whole hog, we're all really low on Sam Darnold, but I'm entertaining that possibility and trying strategically to get Darnold where I can in drafts.
I get it. Especially, this is one that's really more actionable in 2 quarterback super flex leagues.
Yeah.
Someone you can wait on as your quarterback too. And Narrative Street would dictate that, first of all, you have the post Adam Gase effect.
Yeah.
And then remember when we were excited about Joe Brady? Remember when we thought, well, look what Joe Brady did with Joe Burrow.
Right.
Whatever quarterback he's with is going to benefit from what he can do. Did Teddy benefit from it? Maybe. Remember, we have to look back at the Teddy season when he revealed that he had a knee injury. I think it was against Tampa around week 11 or 12. And he said he probably shouldn't have played with that, but he still did. And sure enough, like his production dropped off. The team dropped off. And also in a footnote, they traded Greg Little to Miami for like a late round pick. So new regime sweeping out some of the old regime's bad decisions. Okay, off the rails real quick. We started to talk. Spoiler alert, Matthew's back in Iowa. And I was talking about the Quad Cities. And I was trying to tell the story. Quick story. I can go on too long with stories. It's one of the most uncanny things that happened to me in my life. Matt Arabino, who's one of the best light people, and also was like an inspiration, like athletically, went a 95 fish tour. We're on our way out to Boise, Idaho to start 95 summer fish tour. It was the middle of the night. There was no cars around, and we're crossing over the Mississippi River, which is just like a mile outside my window here, in the Quad Cities on I-80, because we're taking I-80 straight out west. Great American road out west. So many things to see. And in the middle of the bridge, Matthew, this is where I was going with the story. This is the uncanny moment. There was a deer. And you know how big that bridge is.
Yes.
It was in the middle of the road, and there was no other cars within sight going either direction, and it was in the lane we were driving in. Thankfully, like, we weren't zoned out. It was so uncanny. It was one of those things like an omen or some sort of sign, because it was so uncanny, and it happened right there in the Mississippi River in the Quad Cities. Why did you tell me you wanted me to save this for the show?
Well, I mean, you were just telling a story, and I could tell you were getting excited about the story. So it's like, hey, let's, like, before you get to the end of it, let's save the story for the show. That's an amazing thing, because I mean, yeah, the deer has to. That is a long bridge over the Mississippi, which is a very wide river, right? Like, for a deer to wander out there, I mean, it really has to want to get out there.
Felt like I was hallucinating. So
yes.
What's something uncanny that has happened to you in your life?
Oh man. Wow. That's
glitch in the matrix,
and that is talking about the uncanny. That's a great on the couch type of question there. Man, I honestly, that is such a great question that, like, I have the uncanny feeling of knowing that there have been things that have happened, things that feel a little bit kind of supernatural.
Yeah.
But I cannot articulate
Okay,
There are some that come to mind, and I
we
don't
got
even
5
want to
minutes.
say because it makes me sound crazy.
Well,
Yeah.
no, but no, that's the thing, man. So I was just gonna say, I was just gonna blurt out and interrupt you and say, "Do you believe in ghosts?" Right? I mean, this is the kind of
Do I
path we're
believe in
on.
ghosts? No, I don't believe in ghosts.
So in New Orleans, if you say you believe in ghosts, people don't think you're crazy. People want to know more.
Yeah.
Tell me about it, right? And supernatural. You brought up the word supernatural. And supernatural just means outside of
Yes.
nature, but what we define nature as basically is what we understand about nature. So just because something is outside of our understanding doesn't mean it doesn't exist,
Yeah.
right? Things that we can't pick up with our five senses or our sixth sense uh, doesn't mean, I mean, I suppose our sixth sense is what picks this up. The idea being that there are things that there are bounds to our perception, and the things that exist outside of our perception are still real and still influence the reality we're in, even though we don't perceive them. This is where I said this on a show earlier today. This is something I've been fond of saying lately. I don't know why. That like one of our parents is nature or animals and or earth, and one of our parents is God or a creator energy. And this is where we get to like, you can look around and see like, how did we figure out that there were things that were unseen that influence this physical space that we manipulate? Some people might say aliens or something, but there's more things that are outside of our understanding right now. We don't know them because they're outside of our understanding, and they're influencing what's happening to us. So it's not crazy to feel like you've been touched by something that you don't understand.
I will say, so this is going back years and years. At one point in my life, I lived in Seattle and I was doing research for a book that I ended up not completing, but it was a rock star biography on Lane Staley, who is the lead singer of Alice in Chains.
Wow.
And I was having a phone conversation with someone who I'll just say kind of randomly, like psychically is sort of like in touch with things just kind of floating around.
Yeah.
And so this person said to me, "Oh, that's so weird." Because I would have regular phone conversations with this person. This person said, "Oh, it's so weird. I had a dream about Lane last night," and sort of described what was happening in the dream. And then I started having conversations with other people in the Seattle area, and they described what it was that the person dreamed. And this is sort of like isolated type of like not a famous event in his life, like not the kind of thing that someone would have been able to Google and find out.
Right.
You know, and this like I've had experiences like that with this person and with some other people where like I just know that somehow sort of like psychically or spiritually, whatever it is, like they are tuned in to a feed that the rest of us are not tuned into, you know. And so I have had that experience, and it's enough to make me think that there is something sort of beyond us, but like I can't say any more than that, you know what I mean? Like I can't speculate as to like what that is. I sort of do believe that there are like forces for good and evil in the world and in the universe, but you know, I don't know if that aligns with the way a lot of people think about God or religion or things like that.
No, this all makes a lot of sense. And there is something, but it's beyond us, is that web, that fabric, the internet is real, already existed before we did the computer internet that we're on right now. It's everything is connected. Everything is passing. Like when you learn that forests, like animals, plants under the soil, like talk to each other through fungi and pass things to each other. Like, there's already an internet out there. And there are these things that we could. And why did you wait until the 56th minute to mention that you were working on a rock star biography? We could have done the whole show. That's wow. See, we just have to do another. We have to get you on again, and we're not going to talk about football at all because this is where the real action is at, for sure. And you even put it in your name, man, Oracle. You know that you're appealing to the supernatural by putting that in your handle, whether you bent to or not. And it is being in touch with something, having that third eye open. I like to say lately, we're pretending to be fortune tellers.
You know,
some people really are.
I'm going to add one more thing. It's uncanny, and this happened in Seattle. You know, I was playing fantasy football with these guys, and I got the Oracle moniker because in the first episode of the league, there was the little kid named Matt Freedman who was the fantasy football Oracle.
There you go.
And that was really weird. Just seeing the commercial for that show, and in the commercial they just say, "Who's that kid?" "Oh, that's Matt Freedman, the fantasy football Oracle." And then all the guys just turn and look at me like that. That was weird. That was uncanny.
That was destiny. Just like you listening to the show, folks, you're always the best. Stay classy.